start that first meeting, and then I just roll through the day, trying to finish things in the other windows.
Yeah, and we were looking for a place for the index discussions. It was like, oh, how we can squeeze that in?
Yeah, I think we may have to get to that point where we say, like, we got to start overlapping. People are, you can't be involved in every single discussion. I know I'm personally at that point where I'm like, there's too many going on right now, but that's good. The project is big, and we kind of all have to give up parts of it to other people to take care of.
Yeah. And also there are so many good ideas I would like to pursue, even cannot follow those which I find very, very interesting.
Yeah. Oh, even the ones I'm supposed to, like, I'm supposed to finish a pass on that UDF spec, and I still haven't. I'll do that after this meeting, hopefully. It's just really hard. It's hard to do it. To do it all. Can't. Yeah, I think it'll eventually be that if you want to be involved in every single Iceberg discussion, you'll just be in meetings all day long, every day. And we probably, at that point, people have to just decide what are your priorities. It's no longer realistic. I mean, I think people already naturally do that with smaller things. Like, not everyone goes to Iceberg Rust, and not everyone goes to Iceberg Go. And I think it's going to have to become that way for certain parts of the code base as well, where you're like, I'm not going to be involved in that. Or if I am, I have to give up something else. So, such is life.
Yeah. When I joined Hive, it was like 5 million lines of code. So it was natural.
Yeah.
Some part, it has to work. You have some rock, isn't?
How many lines are in Iceberg right now? Let me check. You've made me so curious. Oh.
Still counting?
Oh yeah, I'm being lazy. Running. I'm using clock. I don't know how long this will take. I don't think it takes that long.
You should start deprecating code, or you should start using another tool.
No, it just finished. 1.6 million lines of code. 21,000 files.
Yeah, I suppose.
But yeah, of that, 518,000 are HTML though. 600,000 are Java, and then 400,000 Python, and then we got a bunch of other stuff in there, but all less than 20,000.
Yeah, we have Fling and Spark duplicate code for versions. So
yeah, so I did not dedupe along that. So somewhere along around 1 million of actual code lines. Wait, we still have Scala code? Says we still have 8,000 lines of Scala in the project.
Yeah, there's a bunch of Spark.
Yeah, all the Spark integration's still Scala.
Oh, I thought we'd taken all that out.
Wouldn't that be nice?
I still like Scala. You'll never convince me otherwise. Nope, can't work. I like it too much. I mean, I haven't used it now in like 4 years, but.
Yeah, I wish more language had implicits, right? Like, that was the best part of Perl, and
I like being confused about actually like in scope and being.
I don't use implicits. I think those are gross.
Yeah,
but
inline XML.
Yeah,
I think there's a lot of features I really enjoy. I think folks who know me know I hate metaprogramming, so I do hate anything with implicit calls or things that feel like macros. But I do like writing currying functions and stuff like that.
Cool.
Thanks for the interesting discussion. So it's already 9:05. So let's begin the formal agenda today. So we have two topics carry over from the last meeting. So the first one is the remote scan planning. Prashant, I will leave the stage to you.
Yeah. So there are two subparts for it. The first subpart is just like for bringing into awareness that now, since the plan endpoint can mint credentials, there is a well-defined header. It's called x-axis delegation mode. Based on that header, the server knows that it needs to mint credentials, and it can always choose not to. So I had a spec PR. I think there is consensus on that. So I just started a formal vote to say that whenever you are trying to hit the plan endpoint, uh, on those endpoints that can give you plan with completed status and the credentials, you should send this header essentially, so that the server is aware that it needs to mint credential, because we have some kind of like similar handlings inside our server side implementation in Polaris. So just to be consistent with the other endpoints like load table, I think Alex also brought up the register table as another endpoint which can mint credentials. We should have that. So, but my request is just for like the vote thread is just for plan endpoint to be sent this header. So please do vote. It has been open for a while. I just opened this vote at a very bad timing, so it might have like landed very deep in your inbox over the like New Year. So in case, and if you have any feedbacks, happy to address. So that's the first part. The second part is on the scan planning mode. So what are we trying to do? Essentially, as part of the load table, we are trying to say to the catalog that should it come to, we are saying to the client that should it come to the catalog for doing the remote scan planning, or it can plan within the client itself, right? So essentially, there are 4 modes that we initially started with. Actually, we started with 3 modes. It was client, optional, and catalog. Client means that you should always do client side planning. Catalog means that you should always come to the catalog for planning. Optional means that you're free to do. And then we had a use case in which there can be a client preferred and a catalog preferred. So currently there are 4 proposed states like client, client preferred, preferred, catalog. And we have like use cases where these can be come into play. So yeah, just to complete on that, and before I give it to you, Ryan, I think it's perfectly fine to have like client and catalog only as part 1. So over to you, Ryan.
Sorry, I've missed most of the discussion on this.
Yes.
I just want to clarify, what is the... Usually I would not see like a please do this in a spec, right? There is like, it's either up to you or it's not. So like I don't understand the logic behind a preferred status, right? Like optional seems reasonable because you're saying this can be planned client side, this can be planned server side, but I'm not forcing you into either one. The preference though is just asking, hey, please don't use server side planning, which is entirely like based on whether the client can plan, right? Like a dumb client isn't going to be able to. And please plan client side is, again, like it's probably going to come down to the client's capabilities. So I'm not sure I understand the logic behind it.
Yeah, I would like to say the use case that we had in mind, Ryan, was like, let's say a server is overloaded and temporarily it says that, hey, it would be nice if client can do the planning, but if it's like running on very low resources, you still can come to me for planning. But my preference is that, hey, if client, so that is one use case that we had in mind when we introduced it. And definitely we can think about that. Is this the use case worth enough to specking it out, or is it something left to the client? So that's where the feedback we are seeking.
My thought is like, clients are always going to be selfish. If a client is resource constrained and prefers the service doing work, the client is always going to, like, a please doesn't necessarily help. You have to have well-behaved clients in order to have them say like, oh, okay, well, the service is a little loaded right now. I don't really see clients implementing or respecting this. I think that if a client is generally resource constrained, rather than risking a blow up, like an out of memory exception, they're going to just delegate to the catalog every time. So like I would probably say that even that doesn't make a ton of sense to me, but I don't know what other people think. Amog, your hand is up.
Yeah, thanks. So basically, for the other case where like a catalog wants to indicate to a client, like the catalog is under load. I think we already have existing mechanisms where the catalog can effectively just throttle the client, and then it's the client's choice at that point on how to handle that, right? So I'm not sure the preference really buys us like anything there as well. So this, I commented this on the PR, so I'm just like, yeah, I think this
the slowdown error code that we have.
I think so. I think that's the mechanism that can be used to handle at least that half of this use case. Yeah,
That seems pretty reasonable, because then it's actually the service saying you have to either wait or plan locally.
Yeah, I think that there are a lot of other ways to address those scenarios. It doesn't have to be through this particular mode, because like a server can just return client and say, hey, I'm overloaded. If it tries to hit the plan endpoint, you say too busy. Like there's lots of response codes and ways you can deal with this. And I think it's rarely going to be the case that a client is configured in the right way that would result in the outcome that you're looking for.
I would like to ask you, the guys. So I wasn't here in the beginning of this discussion. I'm just joined this stuff through the Dev Channel discussion, and I have a mixed feeling around forcing the engines to do the planning on the catalog side. I listed my reasons there in the letter, but just to get it collected here. First one is for this one is like a use case where we are having a read-only table. So basically the catalog shows something to the user which is not really there in an Iceberg sense. It's not, the metadata is not there, and probably the data is organized a little bit differently than we are expecting for a normal Iceberg table. And I don't expect that for these tables there will be updates for this one. And when we were discussing the file format API, it was one of the things was that every Iceberg table should support all of the features Iceberg supports. I'm not really against the read-only tables, because I see very many use cases for that. I just want to have a clear understanding of what we think about that, or is it changed, or it was a misunderstanding from my side at that time. And the other ones are really this things like sorry, I have to open the letter for that. But basically, the one which is the engine compatibility in this sense, that if we start asking this feature for the engines, it is a kind of different planning features which are required from for the engines to do. So it's really interesting, important to know that we are pushing job work on the engine side, and the whole stuff together is moving in a direction when catalog kind of owns the table. And until now, my feeling was that we would like to be able to share tables, be open, and allow users to move from catalog to engine. And they would like to understand if our stance changed on that or not.
I'll respond first. I know I've added a little bit to the thread. A couple things. Like one, I would say, I don't think the intention ever was that everybody has to do everything that's in the spec, right? The spec defines what the behaviors are, and the reference implementation is supposed to provide an example of how to do all those things. We know that there's a wide range of implementation. Ideally, everybody would have all the functionality and features. Some of that is technology constrained. Some of it's constrained by, just, the maturity of different implementations. So we know that it's always going to be a spectrum. And I think that's true for any specification. So I wouldn't say that like, hey, it had to be absolutely this. And, having something that only, produces part of the Iceberg metadata so clients can consume. I mean, it's not ideal. Obviously, you'd have everything, but it does introduce a level of interoperability that may not be there without it. And I think that that's where we're getting with the scan plan, is not necessarily to say, hey, the approach here is lock-in. There's actually a lot of negatives in terms of like how engines can use this for planning, what they can push down, other things. So there are lots of limitations to it, but it isn't necessarily, hey, we're doing this to try and lock everything behind it. It's actually potentially to expose things you couldn't expose or fill gaps in functionality, whether it's, policy-based or security-based, that you can't do with just direct access. So I think the focus is less about like having full spec implementation using this particular path for everything, but it is about opening up access to data and improving interoperability, as opposed to trying to leverage this for lock-in. And like my point was in the thread was like, there's lots of ways you can lock up data, and JDBC is a standard. And it's a great way to lock up data because you have to go through a well-defined interface, how it's stored, the availability of it is all behind, something that is processing and executing that query. But that's not really the motivation here. And while, yeah, you could expect that like some nefarious actor could say, hey, well, we'll have a catalog that only does scan planning. The reality is like customers are going to decide that. Like they want to put data in their own buckets. They want to have it in a representation that they can move around. That will probably be the ideal and still what most people want. But there's lots of cases where you can't represent data or other, storage formats, representations, features without something like scan planning. So, I mean, that's my general thinking. It's just like, yeah, you could think of it from a very negative perspective, but I look at it more from interoperability and availability of data perspective. I'll kick it over to Prashant.
Yeah, so plus one to what Dan said, I think it's more from the capability point of view. Yeah, you can do this in addition to what you could have done before. I also want to double tap on like what is read-only table and what's the status quo of that. For example, there are tons of possible scenarios in which you actually have a table in a different form, which is translated into an Iceberg form where it's only read-only in that sense. Like there are managed tables in various vendors, and they work on that same assumption that you literally write Iceberg metadata on top of that particular data. And then that becomes and can be served by load table as this point of time as well. So what scan planning is enabling us is that, okay, if you want to have that kind of a scenario in which you have a table in different format, like for example, Hive-based format was one of the examples, we can actually expose them as Iceberg tables, because in the end, what matters is the data files. Now, can I write to those tables? No, because one of the reasons was that you need actual manifest to validate that your operations uh, are handling the right isolation level. But can it be leveraged to have or leverage the ecosystem that we have across the Iceberg clients? The answer is yes. So that's the way we are also here thinking. And our motivation is also, from the security point of view, that, hey, in the end, and what does it matter? What do you want to give access to the users? You can have that kind of a predicate there. And the way we have so far modeled, at least, is that storage and compute are kind of decoupled, and an admin of a catalog gives access to the storage, to the catalog, which can be used for minting those credentials. So they always have a choice, and see if someone is trying to, play around with the spec or something that can cause vendor lock-in, that should be visible to them, because it's in the end the storage that the person who is configuring the catalog owns. So that's my all take that from where we are. It does not introduce more such lock-ins. And the second thing is that it's the admin of the catalog who has first of all given the privilege to the catalog to do the necessary actions on the storage. So this might be quite easily highlighted. It can't be just opaque to the end users. So that another point that I would like to make. So yeah, with that, that's my thinking of the overall approach and my take on that. So I will let Russell also for adding more things.
I think you've hit both you and Daniel have hit most of the things I want to talk about. The only one I really wanted to add to this is that the way I see this property, and this kind of also goes to the way Ryan was asking about it initially, is this is for a well-behaved client to fail fast, because a catalog can always do this kind of restriction on its own and expose that information through like an exception in some other way. But this lets us basically have a client that's well-behaved know that when it tries to load it a certain way, it won't have the credentials it needs to read the table. It won't actually have the access to read the table. It has to go through a different endpoint to get the credentials. So like if you're a user that only has the ability to read certain files in the table, you can imagine you have to go through a plan scan endpoint because we need to know exactly which files they are. It gives you just the credentials for those. So that's just the way I'm kind of thinking about it. Ryan, you're next in line.
Gotcha. I'll go. Just want to make sure you were finished. I want to take up the question of are we inconsistent when we're talking about here's what you should do for compatibility in tables versus here's what we think of in cases like this. Tables definitely have a correctness and like a certain compatibility story, right? Which is that we really want people to implement the full spec. We know that they don't, but we want to minimize the areas where you can have a table that is unreadable by some other client. And you know, we're very careful about versioning with forward and backward compatibility and all that. We generally want to maximize interoperability at the individual table level. On the other hand, the REST catalog in that spec is a very different thing. It is, in many cases, it's a matter of optional functionality that make things generally better, right? So in this case, by adding optional functionality of being able to interact with metadata on the server side, we're actually opening up the ability to read tables to, you know, anything that can basically read Parquet or Avro or the underlying data files. You don't have to have a heavyweight table metadata implementation. And so we think of the Iceberg spec on the REST side as being a whole lot more flexible because of this optional functionality. And that also has grown out of our, you know, our history there, which is that catalogs have very different capabilities. You know, if you're using a Hive catalog, we wanted you to be able to put something in front of that Hive catalog or in front of your JDBC endpoint that speaks the REST protocol, and then optionally add to that. And we actually have like this, you know, larger catalog ecosystem of slightly different capabilities, things that are delegated to catalogs. And I think that we're maintaining the REST spec in this way in order to like encourage people to like do smart things at the catalog level. And that's just different than the table level, where tables we maximize interoperability. And at the catalog level, we try to give flexibility so that you can you know, meet use cases as needed. It's not necessary to support like, you know, JavaScript clients trying to interact with Iceberg metadata, but it is really nice if your catalog supports that.
Okay, so do my understanding is correct when what you are saying is that the table format itself is very different from the table we are served by the catalog. So it is just accidental that's an Iceberg table? Iceberg.
So I think in this case, right, if you look at this, like The table spec, we want to be something where you implement the whole thing, because what's on disk is like basically what's shared. On the other hand, in a catalog, if we add this planning endpoint, then yeah, I can put a Hive table behind the planning endpoint, right? I could put potentially a Delta table behind the planning endpoint. Like it gives us a lot more flexibility. Even with Iceberg tables, I can have languages that have no direct Iceberg implementation able to interact with tables. And I can also do things like lock down the metadata folder, because like, being able to muck with metadata is kind of a security risk. I think that long term, we could see implementations that choose to completely abstract away the metadata folder. And although you have things in Iceberg format, normal clients don't get to access and interact with that metadata directly. I don't know how far down that path we're going to go, but I think this fits with the philosophy of like catalogs are very smart services, and we want to give them the flexibility to make these choices and see what can be built. Like we want to enable the catalog space, not overly constrain the catalog space.
So basically, a REST catalog could serve whatever table it serves. Accidentally, it could be an Iceberg table, but whatever else, it's just a coincidence.
I think that that's a really cool feature of this, that you could like make all your Hive tables look like Iceberg, and then that actually brings in a pretty amazing way of moving from Hive tables to Iceberg tables.
I mean, I'm fine with that. I'm just trying to understand the situation, or the how.
I think that this endpoint gives us a lot of those nice properties, which is why we're interested in adding it. There are, concerns about, hey, what happens if someone becomes reliant on this endpoint and the catalog doesn't support it? I think we're willing to take on those cases because of the number of cases where we can actually increase interoperability and increase the ability to work with these tables, even though some clients may be in the end dependent on it.
Okay, thanks. Yufei?
Yeah, I want to echo.
Sorry, Yufei.
I want to echo the point that catalogs actually is much more capable, and it's already happening in a lot of the company which provide the catalog itself, either IRC compatible or not even IRC. They can do a bunch of like smart things by generates Iceberg table or expose Iceberg table. But the backend, it's not Iceberg table, and not even a table. Like it's streaming something like Kafka streaming or the other format. So catalogs usually have this capability to do things, not only IRC. I think IRC, what I'm trying to do here for IRC is make that more, much more like cross-engine compatible, so that multiple engine don't have to go to each individual catalog provider to do customization. Right, the individual clients. So I think it's already happening in the whole industry where we want to generate this table on the fly and do things. That's my point. Other use case, I think, like FGAG, maybe it's only possible if we have some capability from the catalog side. The table itself may constrain by itself the capability. How do we express the FGAG?
Yeah, I think actually this is a good follow-up to what you were saying. The one use case that we actually have in the wild that we can point to here is a good example of like how this benefits like the interoperability story, which is I think Glue has an implementation of an early version of the specification for scan plan. And my understanding is what they're actually doing is they're leveraging like being able to dump Parquet files from Redshift and then use scan planning to provide access to Redshift data. So the source of truth is actually in Redshift. And I don't think that like people who are using Redshift for those purposes are, planning to move their operational data purely to Iceberg just to expose it as Iceberg. But being able to use scan plan allows them to kind of figure out which Parquet files have they dumped, do the planning operations, provide interoperability for Iceberg clients without having to go directly through JDBC to slam your RDS or your Redshift instance. And so I think we're going to see more and more of these stories of like either adapting systems for compatibility, the FGAC cases, things like that. And that's where I see there's just like a lot of greenfield for improved interoperability and access to data, as opposed to going the other direction where it's like, hey, everybody's trying to lock this down. And I would point out there are serious limitations as we found as we started to implement some of the client side for scan planning, because you can't do like dynamic pruning, you can't do many of these other things that engines that really need to be performant will require. Like you won't choose this for the optimum performance. You'll choose this for interoperability. Prashant.
Yeah, precisely. I mean, if you just like talk about use case, as Dan said, we ran this for exposing a proprietary data format to be exposed, like not even like the data is in Parquet, it's in a proprietary data format that is now offloaded into an Parquet data format that Iceberg readers understand. And thanks to you, now we have a pluggable readers of those file formats as well. So those capabilities will expand even more. Who knows what all things we can expose. We just don't have to rely on the underlying format to be Parquet. The other aspect, I think Ryan mentioned that, and I want to bring this up because that was one of the major motivations when we started here. Re-kicking off the thread for scan planning was sharing. So the way sharing works is that you can give access to an individual file that corresponds to your filters. And believe it or not, it's a very wild use case for like customers to share data to their downstream consumers. And with the things like the partitioning being hidden in Iceberg, and everyone has their own directory structure, having something that can be scoped down to a file level and then shared to the downstream consumer is really, really helpful as a use case downstream. So just to say that, okay, so in these scenarios as well, for example, rather than we asking the clients to explicitly connect to the sharing endpoint, we can say that, hey, because your share is introduced in such a way that you need to consume the downstream, just the access to the files that you want, I can force from the catalog to come for you to come to me via sharing endpoint so that you get the files that you have access to. And these can be scoped down to an individual files, or it can be even be down to a use case where you are actually generating those files and then giving those files back. So sharing is definitely one use case in the industry that we are like trying to be actively also target, apart from this interoperability target format. So we just want to make a case that, okay, how forcing things from the catalog also and redirecting it to connect to the sharing endpoints can enable and unblock these downstream use cases. Yeah, just my things were just addition to what Dan said. So nothing new, but more about the use case that would be unlocked if we had this. Yeah, over to you, Peter.
Cool. Thanks you for all of the nice use cases you shared. And as I said, I'm really not against this kind of stuff, but I wanted to understand what's there. And to be honest, I think even for us, it will be very, very useful to provide a read-only view above or other data structures. My question is, during the discussion here, one thing which I came to my mind, and also Russell mentioned that probably if we provide a read-only API, we could define how a catalog should expose sharing the table metadata or giving up the ownership of the data. And we could provide an interface for that. Okay, you can do it by I run the planning for a star query and then copy the data and create my metadata above that. But if you formalize this one, we create an endpoint for it, maybe even an optional endpoint, so the catalogs are not necessary to implement that. then it could be a good way to formalize how this migration, for example, could be done from one catalog to other. And if the users see that this endpoint is supported by a catalog, then they can be sure that, okay, with the standard tool, I can move my data from the other catalog, or I can get my catalog here and I move around in the whole Iceberg ecosystem.
May I answer this? I mean, we are talking about the export endpoint, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So here are two things that I was thinking about. So number one thing is that can we achieve something like, currently whenever we load a table, there is a dedicated field called metadata location, which is supposed to be the metadata pointer of. And one use case is that if we can tighten that up and say that, okay, this needs to be a well-defined pointer, which has actually all the snapshots that were committed by the client, and have something about that in the spec, what we can say is that, hey, I don't give access to this file if you are in the governance mode, but whatever the path that I will give you is the consistent path. Then since you own the storage, you can use that pointer to register the table in any other catalog you want to. Another thing is, obviously, I mean, I think Russell is also on, like, was advocating for the same endpoint, that we need to have a clear export endpoints which defines the state of the table, which as of like committed by the clients, and that could serve as a way to migration. So there are two chain of thoughts. I don't know which one we'll prefer over the other, but would love to know what other people think. So over to you, Ryan.
So I want to first make a note that the table spec does require that your like metadata is in that. Like, so I would say that this is already a clear requirement from the table spec that we may choose to relax in the future, but like it is the way it is today. And that the metadata coming back from the REST catalog should be basically identical to what is in that file. I don't think that there's a way around that today. The other thing is I want to make sure that, and Hona's probably saying the same thing, my guess, but rather than going into other endpoints and speculative, we have like other things to discuss before we, I think, circle back to, hey, what other endpoints do we want?
Yeah, exactly. So I just raise a hand to send like a stop sign. So Peter, do you have like any quick statement to make? And I think we can quickly wrap up on this and move to the next one, and we can keep the discussion in the thread.
Okay, just one note, and I will leave it to, is that with the endpoint, when we say that the catalog could say that I don't want the client to do the planning, we basically finally realize that even a read-only table doesn't need to have a real metadata JSON and metadata stored in the file system, because users need to rely on the catalog to do the planning, and we are removing the barrier here. And that's my last.
Yep.
Okay, sorry.
Thanks. Yeah. So given the complexity, I would say like probably we need like more discussion time on this one. So if we need a dedicated thing, Prashant, please let me know if you want to like schedule that. So let's move to the next topic on the list, which is the UID for namespaces. Tyler, do you want to give more details on this one?
Yeah, sure. Google has the Big Lake catalog, and basically it's just yet another REST catalog. We talk about the interoperability between the things. We are working on a use case like the giving the permissions on the namespace level, and if we implement on the sync mode, then definitely there is no issue. Namespace will delete it, and whenever it's deleted, we will delete the policies. But due to the load on the system, we implement a asynchronous fashion, but there is no way to identify the namespaces if it is recreated again, before we delete the policies. and this created security issues. In addition to that, we also thought about that, the catalog federation between the IRC catalogs, and the internal system is kind of easy. Like we can switch the implementation from asynchronous to synchronous, and dictate the namespace policies. Whenever the namespace is deleted, we will immediately delete the policy. But for federation use cases, it's not possible because we don't have visibility to when it is deleted, or what happens on the external, or the federated catalog. Do you guys think that can be introduced a UUID for the namespaces? And I also see that on the community there was a ask about renaming the namespaces, which is not the applicable. This feature can enable that feature also too. All right.
What would you change about the semantics? I mean, because right now we have create and drop, and those pretty clearly do drop things. So would you have a create with a certain UUID actually undelete something? I think that is surprising behavior. So I'm not really connecting like this idea of having a UUID for namespaces with anything that makes sense from the create delete endpoints that we have today.
The thing is that we are just looking at unified identification for the namespaces. It's just like tables, we have the UUID, or views, we have the UUID. We are looking that can we have the the namespace UUID when you create it. Then if we don't have a control for the federation case, right? I am federating like another IRC catalog.
Sorry, I think I understand. So you have the use case is a user comes in and drops a namespace, recreates a namespace, and those namespaces are somehow not identical, meaning that like I think currently we fail if a namespace is not empty, right? So you're saying that, well, yeah, how are the, okay, so it's the policy behind the namespace, and you need to know, has the policy been dropped? Has the policy not been dropped? You basically, in change detection, you need to know this is a different namespace. I need to.
Correct.
Isn't this what the events endpoint is for? If this is a federation kind of thing where you're polling the catalog and trying to figure out what happened, isn't that what we use events for?
Do we have events that we haven't implemented?
Well, I mean, before we go and say like we're adding features to other endpoints for the purpose of change detection, I think we would want to say like, should we, double down on going and finishing the events endpoint and getting that in for these federation cases, because that's what that is intended for. I'll shut up and let Dan go.
No, I mean, I was just trying to clarify at the beginning of your comment that this is purely for the federation case, right? Because if you are the managing catalog of a namespace, you probably have an internal identifier that you're tracking. So you can manage, the add drop policy changes, like all that kind of stuff. So it's purely that like, hey, you're operating on another catalog, and you want to know that like, hey, the next time I load that namespace, if it's different, I can't apply the policy that I was caching on top of that namespace.
This is definitely the best use case for this UUID, yes. But in addition to that, there is a security path on our side, which we want to identify if user is just delete and drop the same rename at the same name, or they are doing the renaming for the specific namespace.
Yeah, I'm concerned. Like, I do see that there is a gap here. If you wanted like purely transactional behavior across all the things, right? Because we can't necessarily guarantee the operations like we do against a table where like, hey, if you rename, we can assert that, hey, you're renaming the thing that I intend to rename, which was this specific UUID. Like if we add rename, we couldn't do that. I don't think we currently support rename.
We don't support the rename. There's a add-on drop.
Yeah. So you also, like, I guess add drop. Drop is actually an example where, hey, if somebody had actually add dropped it and created a new one, and then you drop, but you actually intended to do the other, like you can't assert the UUID of the one that you were intending to drop. So these are like pretty narrow cases here.
Yeah, most the clear case is the federation. I agree with you. Those are the narrow form, but this also unblocked that rename things. That's why I say that. But
I think it just creates a lot of additional complexity because, like, once you add that, then you also need a endpoint, like how we have the commit endpoint to provide all the requirements and updates for these particular operations that you're trying to assert. Like, it goes a long way, and I'm just trying to understand, is the use case that we're solving for really worth all of that trouble?
So maybe to add a bit to the use case. So for example, in Lakey, so first of all, I think the events endpoint can definitely be used to track this if it happened, right? But it's not a really convenient way. So I think there are more use cases where having this would be helpful. In Lakekeeper, for example, we always have a namespace ID, which is the primary key, and to which we attach policies, permissions, authorization decisions. And we always return them currently as a namespace property. For example, you can then, we have like custom endpoints that allow you to move a namespace, including all its contents and its like policies, to somewhere else. And the UI needs to be able also to track this, or the client needs to be able to track this somehow. And the name is simply not a good way to track this because the name changed. And if we treat this as changeable, then being able to track this namespace somehow via an ID is super helpful, also for operations inside the catalog, because you have things tied to it. And so I guess currently we're using this more of an internal notion. So we always send it back, right? And then you can use the ID in our management endpoints. But making that a more first-class member, I think, might help in use cases when we might add these, or might want to add these additional functionalities. Yeah.
So I think it's reasonable to say, like, we're all tracking UUIDs to identify these objects that may have, names applied to them, and those names can change. I think that that's reasonable. I'm not sure that I would recommend people, like, I'm personally worried about workarounds for not using events and actually getting a high fidelity list of changes from catalogs. I think that that's leading to more changes elsewhere, and like kind of doubling down on this pattern of scraping other catalogs, which is like what we were hoping to avoid. I haven't really heard many things other than like, well, it's more convenient when you're scraping other catalogs. Maybe I'm missing a use case here, but like I have zero problem adding a UUID to namespaces. Mostly I would say, like, let's try and focus more of our effort on getting events done and accessible, so that we don't rely so heavily on these things, if that makes sense.
So, I think CDC star events will have. I think Christian in a lot of the discussion with events, Lakekeeper is gonna provide the CDC style events, which is kind of a transactioner. Every single rights will guarantee have the event out. But the IRC event itself is not provided, like from spec perspective, it does not provide that kind of guarantee. So even we say one of the implementation provide that, the other implementation may not honor that as well. So events can have, but only in certain implementation where it provide such kind of guarantee that this is transactional and always happens, and not miss one single update for namespace and table. I'm kind of agree that maybe if we really want to kind of understanding the rename use case, maybe something like UID could be used for. Christian?
Yeah. One question that I had was that if we make it optional, right? Can it help in solving the problem? In a sense that do we have to go with required from day one? In a sense that if you'll see, there was time in which table UUID in V1 spec was, and as of this time is also optional. But going forward, it is required. But if table is V1, we'll have to have all this handling, and rest is not version. So that's one thing. The second thing that I wanted to bring on is that generally when you want to drop something, and if it has a policy attached, we generally don't allow you to drop that. So first we allow you to detach the policy, then you drop that, and the things are all hidden. Like everyone operates on a name kind of a thing. For example, columns field ID is something that no one wants to operate on. Maybe it's a backend kind of a semantic, but column name is everything everyone that operates on, and the backend system tracks the field ID. So within the same catalog, I apologize, I was not able to understand what are the concrete use cases that a catalog cannot abstract from itself. From like federation point of view, I totally agree, because it's like in a system that I am not the owner of that particular system. I don't know what happened when I am polling it again. I don't know if it has changed or it's the same one. So that are my two questions that I have for this forum. Yeah, Stephen.
Yeah, I just have a quick question. Let's say assume we adopt the UID. What would be the upgrade story? Let's say, does the catalog need to update the existing namespace to add the UID, or
There is no update for the namespace currently. We can create it and we can delete it.
So I think, like, I mean, we could figure out what the migration path is, but if we make it optional, then, it's up to the implementation, whether they want to add it then, add it when it's created the next time,
okay. Yeah, that's it for me.
Okay, yeah, definitely I agree for, for federation is the definitely clear use case too, because we don't know what happens on the external catalogs. For, the big lake specifically, we have also internal policy, the applications. The team wants to use that, the UUID, and we didn't want to go, of the things, because even internal big lake, they are using the different systems to detect that. It will help us to apply the security policies, for the namespace, and that's why we say that it's valuable. Initially, it start with the discussion about how we can apply and detect the security things are changed, then it just translated our internal discussions. Oh, we cannot detect also external, the catalogs. Then that's why I just introduced this idea to having a UUID. I don't believe it will be required as we have the old version of the catalogs. It has to be optional, of course, and then it will be useful for all of us, I believe.
Oh, thanks. So I think like I think the next move forward for this one could be the continue the discussion in that thread. I saw you have already posted that that in this thread there. So yeah, just encourage people to chime in more to that one. I think we still have time for the next topic, which is the batch load and batch load endpoints. Stephen, do you want to give more details on that?
Yeah, I probably just spend a couple minutes talk about the use cases, since we only have 5 minutes. So I think the use case this potentially can enable, I think first one is the catalog federation, which I already talked about it. I agree long term, if the events endpoint provides strong guarantee, that's probably the ideal solution for catalog federation. But then we also understand there's some implementation complexity, right? To support strong guarantee, but then you need to change the persistent layer. There's also runtime hardware. So maybe that's not all the catalog. Maybe we'll provide strong guarantee, but without strong guarantee, the catalog federation is not going to benefit. So batch load endpoint can make the scraping more efficient, with the E-tag, and it's a bit relatively straightforward to implement. There's no persistent layer change.
So that's the first use case. The second use case is even like a regular query, they potentially can benefit. Let's say your query touch 5 tables, they potentially can do one batch load for all the 5 tables. Third use case are listed for the material view. So for material view, we want to compare the table state sorting the refresh, the last refresh table state, compare that with the latest table state in the catalog. So if the refresh state have 5 tables, we can do one bulk load from catalog and make that freshness evaluation a little bit faster. So those are kind of 3 use cases are listed in the doc. Yeah, just I think probably the most important question is, hey, do we have enough use case to justify this patch endpoint? I think that's probably the most important question. Yeah, I'll stop here.
I think my main concern again is like doubling down on this pattern of scraping catalogs regularly, because that's just creating a ton of load on these catalogs. Like if we want to do, you know, catalog federation, I would love to see like the effort going into and you know, reviewing the events endpoint and getting that done and building on that framework, rather than like going and creating more endpoints. Because although I said earlier we do want a lot of flexibility in the IRC spec, having many ways of doing things and turning things off and on, like we don't want a ton of complexity there either. And so like in this case, yes, there are materialized view and like query resolution benefits to a batch load endpoint, but that is very different than a like batch load endpoint used to scrape a catalog. Like if we're talking, I'm going to, and I saw this in the thread, if I'm gonna like go list a whole bunch of tables and then try and batch load them all, then that makes me concerned that we're not using the right mechanism and we're splitting effort across things where we would see benefits if we just work together on the events endpoint. So I don't similarly, like I don't have a big problem with the idea of a batch loading endpoint, but I would definitely place priority on the events endpoint for federation use cases.
Yeah, I think one problem with the events endpoint is that not because we're not going to put the strong guarantee in the spec. So due to the complexity of implementation, so it's hard to kind of expect catalog will provide that guarantee that even the catalog federation wouldn't require. Yeah.
So like let's talk more about that at a future sync then, because if the argument is that events is not fit for purpose, then we shouldn't do events. Right? Like if we're all just going to scrape catalogs anyway, then why are we doing events? But I think that, you know, like in the federation use cases, my take is that if you're federating a catalog, you have to accept some level of staleness and limitations from the other catalog, right? You're never going to get to where you constantly delegate from one catalog to another and are constantly in sync. And so like the federation use case inherently has that limitation that I think matches the limitations of the original or like source of truth catalog. So, I mean, to me, it seems like one or the other. Either events is, you know, imperfect, but that defines the limitations of your catalog federation, or events is not the right mechanism, and maybe we shouldn't be investing in it. Does that? What's the argument against that?
So I have an argument against that in that if you have both, then you can have an events endpoint that you can rely on most of the time, but you probably still want some way to actually get the full state at some point. So like you don't want to do a batch call every single time. But if we're saying that the guarantee is not there, which is probably something we have to do because I don't know how else we get the spec through. I think there's enough people who don't want to write a completely durable event log. I don't know why, but I think we have some strong voices there. This would be the thing that you run like once an hour or once a day to actually bring things back in line. Sorry, I didn't mean to jump in front of you.
Sorry, I just want to double tap on one of the use case where the team is kind of struggled, but because they want to provide the SLA guarantee to their user customers, but because of the events, there's no guarantee, and the remote catalog usually depends on the implementation. They may or may not do the CDC style events, so that's extremely hard for the team to just completely rely on the event. They still have to go to the catalog to load each individual table, which is very expensive in certain use cases. I think this is one of the major motivation that if we have batch loading, then if like every 5 minutes or 10 minutes we do batch loading for one namespace, that is acceptable and provides certain guarantee to the users.
I mean, we're going to scrape the entire catalog every 5 minutes. Makes me very worried about this pattern. Like, then why are we thinking about events at all? Like, I buy, Russell, I buy your argument that when we first set up Federation, I need to get the initial state, and I want to occasionally check that initial state on a, you know, daily seems like a reasonable cadence. But if we're talking like, hey, we're going to check the state on a daily cadence, do we need a batch load endpoint to optimize that? And wouldn't we be better off investing in the events endpoint for the like keeping up with the foreign catalog?
If we say it's guaranteed delivery, I think then you're okay. If you say that it's catalog best effort, then someone's going to ask, but like, what if I miss one? I want to make sure that I never end up in a state where an event went to one catalog and I never get it. Because if we say it's best effort, then there's a chance I'll never ever see it.
The only way to do that is to pull the catalog, right? Like, you should not be using Federation if you cannot tolerate staleness, because like you're just never going to guarantee that.
If we guarantee the event log, you can.
Okay. I mean, I would rather guarantee the event log and have, but what's going to happen is people are going to take those guarantees.
See, I see Daniel's upset with guarantees.
No, like, I mean, like, implementations can provide guarantees. We don't need to spec that you have to guarantee. That's dangerous, actually.
Well, it would, yeah. I mean, that's exactly the point I'm trying to make, is that if we require guarantees, you're going to get implementations that break the guarantees.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, I mean, choose one or the other. If we require guarantees, you're going to get the exact same behavior, and you're going to point to the other catalog and say, those guys dropped the ball when you get something out of sync. I mean, like, with catalog federation, you are never going to be perfectly in sync, and guarantees are very, very hard. So, like, I think this is a expectation issue.
If I may just add one small other use cases is like, dashboards, like whenever you have like a UI in which you are having a federated catalog mounted in your own catalog, you want to show the most up-to-date view of that catalog, and I totally can see that, okay, we can have expectations around, but it's the reality from at least my previous employer. We used to literally do in as much multi-threaded way possible into the downstream catalog to have the dashboard up to date, because that's the dashboard based on which the admin will do grants and do all sorts of things. But just like I'm just saying, from what is available right now as expectation, maybe that expectation is wrong. But that's a use case that's out there and wild is one thing that I would like to bring up.
Yeah, I think Yeah, I wanted to comment on what Ron mentioned, which is either events or the batch. I wonder if we can have both. For the catalog that provides strong guarantee, sure, I think you definitely want to use the events endpoint for the categorization. That's no brainer. But for catalogs, hey, it's hard for me to provide strong guarantee. Then maybe we can do the scraping using the batch load endpoint to do the scraping. The other thing, I think batch load endpoint, this for the other use cases like credit planning, material review, I see them as similar kind of requirement. Do they see that very different?
So we're talking about a rationalization for working on this. Like we're saying like, hey, it'd be useful for this other thing too. But if our motivation is scraping a catalog, and that's why we're working on this instead of the thing that we designed for keeping catalogs in sync, we have a problem. So it's not that I am opposed, like we cannot have a batch load endpoint. I'm just saying like we've got a disconnect in that the thing we wanted for keeping catalog federation happening and keeping catalogs in sync, we are abandoning implicitly by going down this path. Nilesh? Nilesh, sorry.
Yeah. I mean, I've worked on the Metastore as well. It's kind of a similar pattern. Like we used to do scraping of the catalog as well. So both make sense, but I see events as more fire and forget and to build a state afterwards rather than being real time enough, because the mechanism behind that may drop events or you might lose it. You can't accurately build the state enough. So we used to add caches on top of the Metastore to give a live view and then validate it at every write. So there's workarounds to do it, but I think I'm trying to understand where both the options will work. But yeah, it's best effort to rely on events, to be honest. Like if you can scrape it, yes, but you can add more efficiencies on scraping and parsing rather than just being like a batch endpoint might help in that regard, I think.
What was the reason behind not mandating the events in some cases? Can we do a configuration that this catalog provides the guaranteed event handling and this catalog doesn't provide the guaranteed event handling, so it need to be scrapped if you want to have the data, but if the underlying catalogs provides the guaranteed event handling, then we can rely on the events only.
Yeah, I don't think we can require events for lots of different reasons. There may be reasons why a catalog says, I will not emit events for portions of my catalog. There may be reliability concerns. Like, what are we actually guaranteeing? That they are attempting to send the events or that they're actually received? So I agree with what Ryan said earlier, which is you make a strict requirement like that and you're just inviting everybody to be non-spec compliant because they're really just going to do what they want to do. So I think the better approach is to say, this is the representation. You know, if you implement events, you know, you should make every opportunity, do reasonable work to make sure that you're sending events appropriately. But every implementation can define their level of guarantee, right? If you want to provide a Kafka connector with exactly once delivery, blah, 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 you need to define that in the implementation in terms of guarantees. We shouldn't be requiring the reliability from a spec perspective.
From my side, just a quick note that we're already over time, and that especially on this topic, we had a full sync or quite some time in a past sync where we discussed this, and basically as a community came to the decision that we cannot mandate this. And I think if we want to discuss this again and bring this up again, we should probably review past arguments and then do it via the mailing list, and then we can discuss here on a little bit stronger foundation.
Yeah, Christian, thanks for wrapping up. So I think that's also a perfect end for today's great think. So I will show the recording in case anyone drops the meeting earlier can still catch up what we discussed during the overtime time. Okay, thanks everyone for joining this session. See you next time in 3 weeks.
Thanks, bye.
Thanks, bye.